general fund. And then the funds in the account shall only be appropriated. So the question is, and just I'm trying to understand the flow. So these are institutional funds for those specific purposes. But the investment earnings off those, the way I read it, just flows into the general fund. And so the question would be, why wouldn't we allow those to flow back in there to increase the corpus at some point in time? Not to say that we couldn't just let them in there, because it's upon further action of the legislature, but right now those earnings automatically flow to the general fund. And so I'm just wondering why we would do that, because then they are commingled and we don't know exactly, the earnings came off of those specific accounts. So was that discussed, and then why are we doing that?
Mr. Chairman, if I can I just
Bail in there,
on your
Mr.
question
Chairman.
right there, because that was my question, is like, you've got them commingled, but then if you just take it and put it into the general fund, why would you, prohibit commingling? But if you just take it and deposit in the general fund, why would you keep them separate?
So, Mr. Chairman, members,
Mr. Vice Chair, members.
Mr. Speaker,
members. So our intent was not to make policy decisions about how the funds were utilized. Our intent was to help at least the way the committee approached it, was to help to streamline the management of different accounts and funds on behalf of the state auditor at her suggestion. And that certainly there is a policy discussion within this, but this is actually cut and paste language out of current law, session law. We did not, that's why it's before an appropriations committee who can have those broader discussions. Certainly we could have gone down that road, but the request from the state auditor's office as we interacted was, hey, can we just get rid of some of the accounting that is necessary? It is certainly, at the discretion of this committee or any, as we go through the process, to decide if you want those funds handled differently. The other thing, if they can go to the general fund, they can be accounted for. They could actually stay with the institutional fund to support those needs, which are outlined in Romanet 2. So, Mr. Chairman, I certainly agree. We could have, that is a policy discussion. That wasn't the policy discussion that our committee took on. Policy our committee took on was, one, should we codify it? Does that make sense to have a fund out in session law that everybody has to wonder what it did? And two, do we want to have that separate accounting? We made one policy decision to get it in this codified law. That's the draft you have. We made the second one. No, we want the state auditor to continue to account for them separately. That's my recollection. And I think, so this is mirror language out of session law.
Senator Drew.
Yes, I would just, as a member of the committee, that was a discussion I recall, that eventually what you would do is, if you wanted to do so, that you just go online to the finance tab on the legislative website, drop down to the big data book that we've also been working on, and that you'll be able to see which funds were generated from which of these accounts. The only difference is they just be moved and streamlined, so they wouldn't be sitting in separate accounts with the treasurer and with the auditor that they have to ride herd on, and then it would all just go. But you'd still be able to see where the funds were being generated and that they were going and where they were going. They were just going to the general fund. So it was more just a transparency, clear up, more to be just, that's where it's going to end up anyway, not to have so many different accounts of the budget, which some feel is
Mr. Chairman.
like we're hiding money somewhere.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know.
Senator Perkins.
I'll defer to the vice chair, Mr. Chair.
Gentlemen, if either one of you or somebody on this panel can give me an example of, or a couple of examples of institutional lands for which disposition is not otherwise provided for by state or federal law or the conveyance instrument. That's what we're aimed at, right? This whole thing is aimed at those. And I wonder if there's just, I assume one that is not that is like the State Miners Hospital. It has a fund and it's clearly got delineated purposes, but this is aimed by the auditor at institutional lands for which disposition is not otherwise provided for by state or federal law or the conveyance instrument. In other words, the auditor's saying, what am I supposed to do with this money? Give me some direction.
Mr. Chairman, it's not meant to change the flow of money at all. In fact, I mean, you'll see it, the middle of page 2, it still says you have to spend the funds on the institution for which the lands are meant to support. It's simply, you know, the goal with this bill is to put it in our green books instead of session law. And we have the additional consideration that could be added, whether we want to have separate accounts or sub accounts within one account. And those are the 2 decision points here, as far as I can.
Mr. Chairman, that's not what I'm asking at all. And maybe I misunderstand the purpose of the bill. The auditor says, I've got some of these funds and I'm not quite sure what to do with them. There's funds from lands for which the disposition is not otherwise provided for by state or federal law or the conveyance instrument. What is the purpose? And so we're giving it a generic, I'm not trying to change flows. We're giving it a generic purpose. Well, put it in the general fund. The legislature decides what kind of capital items to spend it on in the department from which it came. Because otherwise we don't know what to do with it. I thought, am I misunderstanding the whole purpose of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, so the entire purpose of the bill is to codify existing language. This is not the auditor's language. This is 2013 session law. This is our language. The auditor asked for nothing except to strike one sentence out of this that was about the commingling of the funds.
Okay, well,
Because it'd
thanks
be
for the,
management. It would be managed. That's a management issue. And that's what we were doing as a committee, was trying to clean up accounts and clean up the number of hoops and things that the auditor was. We are making no judgments about the policies in this bill.
gotcha,
Except that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I didn't mean to irritate you.
No, I just want to be
It's just a
clear where we
question.
are.
You have to tell us things several times.
Yeah, can you just give me, what are some examples of lands for which the disposition is not otherwise provided for by state or federal law? If you don't know what they are, that's fine. I'm wondering what that could be.
Well, yeah, so-
I'll ask the auditor.
So Senator Kinsky, I went and I wrote it down and I don't have it now. So it references in the bill. 92-205 GE. How can we, and then 212 E on those. And those are 3 specific institutes. I think those are all within the Department of Health. And believe they're some of our institutional lands. So. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, I believe it's the state hospital. I think it's a prison, and it may be Lander, and I'm just,
It
I'm
is
sorry,
Lander.
I can't come up with it, but it is 3 specific properties that lands were granted to the state of Wyoming by Congress for those purposes.
And so
And-
getting back to the Senator, your question there, and some of the enabling act and under those land grants, a lot of times the language just says for the support of those institutions.
Got you.
That's the typical language. Now, I don't know if that's true for every single one of those land grants, because there's certainly a lot more of those that are in there. And I think that's what, if it's not restricted by that federal land grant language, then it's unrestricted revenue. That's the way I would.
Okay.
I think that's a catch-all language. I'm trying to infer what we actually did back then, but my recollection is that might be the reason that language does that. But the question I would have under the way the bill's constructed, not to say that it's the bill's just codifying existing session law, is whether if we can direct those to the general fund and spend them for anything other than support of those institutions is a legal mechanism. And that's something that our staff attorneys would have to research that.
Mr. Chairman, maybe to provide a little bit more context, I mean, there's a broader effort to consolidate, eliminate unnecessary funds. The auditor can go in and do without changes in statute. She just made through that, this was the one that was identified as being based in statute. And so that's also why you had the other bill. But it's possible to use this bill as a vehicle to accomplish that same goal. So just so hopefully that helps a little bit explain the context.
And that may be why the auditor flagged these, as those others are already directed for certain purposes. In other words, lined out as a line item, and I don't know that, but there is numerous institutional land. University has lands that are institutional lands. Miners Hospital, I think, is some of the gifts. So there's a lot of different I think we have 7 different institutional lands that the OSLI administers, 6 or 7. Anyway, any questions for the committee of the?
So, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So as I understand what I think would happen, this is kind of similar to what Idaho did with all kinds of stuff. They just put it all together and then they just keep track. I think all the auditor does is everything's just prorated, as you take those funds from wherever these funds come from, it's X% of the total. And then everything is just prorated at that point. And so you're still allowing commingling, but you just keep the proration. And I think that's what the auditor ends up doing. And then like say, this doesn't change that, but I think this, I mean, if you did strike the, but that doesn't allow them to necessarily be commingled. And so anyway, but that's a policy decision. All you're doing is, other than Romanet 1 and 2 is you're just taking it straight out of the session laws and putting it into statute.
Mr. Chairman, so the request of the auditor was to eliminate the commingling because the funds are all flowing to the same place, the general fund.
Yeah.
So having this, and for that purpose. Now, the funds within are still going to be used individually in support of those institutions because they are assigned to those institutions. But the flow of outflow, revenue outflow, income outflow is just going to one place. So that's what the auditors, obviously the committee did not agree with that. So we still have the accounting of the outflow with no purpose. Yeah. And so, and to be clear, as I said, and I didn't mean to be irritated, I just want to be clear, we did not make any policy decisions within this. We were just bringing it in to codify it and make it consistent with how we've addressed other funds in our statutes. Well, that was the suggestion. This bill, if it doesn't go forward, nothing changes. If it goes forward, quite honestly, nothing changes. It's just whether it's codified or not. Now, if you want to make the policy decision about where funds flow, whether they stay with those institutional land funds or attributed prorated or proportionally to the support of those institutions, that's a policy decision. Our charge when we took this on was not to make those type of policies. It was simply to try to deal with the accounting side of it on behalf of the state auditor's office.
All right.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
Chairman.
more questions for speaker? No more questions?
I'll tell you in just a second. So it's not bright and lightning.
So, do I have a motion?
Well, I think, is Kathy here to speak on this bill? Mrs. Dolan, is there any public comment? Okay. All right.
Public
Sir,
comments closed.
I'll move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
It's been moved, second.
So just looking up the statutory, and again, I mean, I feel like an idiot because I was on this committee, but just didn't able to attend the meeting. So I'm just absolutely in the dark about this. But anyways, you go back and look at these statutory references on the first page. They all kind of say the same thing. If you go to 12E or 2012E, starting kind of reverse order, just says the Board of Land Commissioners shall direct, subject to the limitations contained in the Constitution of the state of Wyoming, applicable state and federal law, and the conveyance instrument, the control, leasing, exchange, care, disposal of all acquired institutional lands not directly utilized for departmental purposes that are managed or associated with the institution set forth in 9222012C, whether held in the name of the state or the name of the department. 1220212C says the following agencies are assigned to the Department of Corrections under Type 1 transfer, Department of Probation and Parole, the following state institution, Wyoming State Penitentiary, including farms and camps, and the Wyoming's Women's Center. And so that's what they're supposed to do, but it's, but then there's some further discussion in the land commissioner. So I think there's some responsibility to keep track of what's what in that one, but you go back to 206E, and it says the Board of Land Commissioners shall direct, subject to the limitations contained in the Constitution of the state of Wyoming, applicable state and federal law, and the conveyance instrument, the control, leasing, exchange, care, and disposal of all acquired institutional lands not directly utilized for departmental purposes as defined in that. And that's the Wyoming Boys School and the Wyoming Girls School. And then the other one is G, which says exact same thing, except for reference to 205C, which is then the Department of Health. So, I mean, it would be easy enough to simply allow it to be commingled. Just keep track of the portion share, and then you just shove that off to the department. But essentially you do it, if it's go to the general fund, there's more than enough money that covers out of these funds that basically make sure that's distributed to those institutions. So, I mean, I get it. It took me a while, but I get it.
So, Mr. Speaker, pictures work really well with this committee sometimes.
Great crayons.
They're easier to understand.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm a jarhead, so
Maybe.
I know all about crayons, but
Yeah.
um,
At least hieroglyphic.
you know, if certainly if the committee wants to make a policy decision, that is not this bill
Yeah, yes.
as presented. You're welcome to make policy decisions. Obviously, that's the process we go through. And is this bill necessary for what the auditor was trying to accomplish? Absolutely not, because the auditor was trying to simplify the accounting and for the outflow. They're going to still account for the corpuses or the different those. It's just that income type. So the auditor, you know, as at this point is like without the other bill, and with this one only is, you know, I'm not getting any, not relief may not be the word, but simplification of our duties and the duties that we've assigned. It's not duties they've taken upon themselves, the duties that we assigned.
You've got all this together, how much money is?
Mr. Chairman, it's I think it's 1.7 million for this the Department of Health, I think is the state hospital. One of them is, I think, maybe even zero. We're not talking about a lot of money. We're not talking about a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a few, so it's less than 3 million total?
Mr. Chairman, and if you'd like, you know, whether you want to lay this over or decide whether it even comes up on the floor, I'll get you, we have the handout. I just was not prepared enough to come down and have it when I came down, but I will get the handout so you know exactly what the funds are, exactly how much is in them, and the rationale. There's a background paper, a memo from LSO on this issue. And I apologize, I'm not better prepared for you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, do we want to go ahead and take care of it?
Well, the bill's been moved and seconded. Any amendments?
So I do have this one amendment that was, I think this is, looking at this as I think this is kind of a staff correction. I think we're just going back, and if I understand this, you go into line 1, page 13, and delete 2. Page 1, line 13. Whatever I said, forget that. And it's page 1, line 13. So you strike the 2 and insert is hereby continued and codified and shall. So it's just some clarifying language that staff wants, basically a technical correction. Just
Second.
make it warmer and fuzzier.
All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Back on the bill. Karen, would you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Thank you. On Senate File 73, as amended, Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Kinsky.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz. Senator Perkins.
Aye.
Acting Chair Hicks.
Aye.
5 aye.
Who's on, you're on management audit, aren't you?
I am, but so Brian Boner is, and he actually went to the meetings.
Sherry just read the fiscal note on the back. It's 2.1 million.
So we'll see if Senator would be inclined to carry this on.
Are we adjourned?
Not yet.
Okay.
We're
If you
adjourned.
won't, I will. I